On a freezing night at the edge of the forest, a retired Navy SEAL thought his life was finally quiet. No missions, no orders, just silence and a loyal dog by the fire. But when that dog suddenly stopped and refused to move, everything changed. A wounded stranger lay hidden in the snow. The police were closing in, and the past Silas had spent years running from came knocking without mercy. He could have turned away. He could have stayed silent. No one would have blamed him. But faith does not ask what is easy. It asks what is right. That night, a man chose not to abandon the fallen. A dog stood his ground without violence. And in the stillness of the forest, God reminded one broken soldier that his purpose was not over yet. Stay with this story, because sometimes the greatest miracles happen when we choose courage over comfort. Silas Hartman checked the lock twice before stepping away from the door, even though he already knew it was secure. He always checked twice. It was not fear that made him do it, but memory. Memory carved deep into muscle and instinct, the kind that stayed long after uniforms were folded away and orders stopped coming. Outside, snow clung to the ground along the forest's edge, and the wind carried the dry, metallic cold of a Montana winter. The town of Alder Ridge lay several miles behind him, far enough that no one wandered this close to the trees unless they had a reason. Silas preferred it that way. At 44, Silas had the posture of a man who never truly relaxed. He was tall and broad through the shoulders, his movements economical, deliberate, as if every action still mattered. His hair was cut short, dark brown threaded with gray at the temples, not out of fashion, but habit. His face bore the quiet wear of years spent under pressure, lines at the eyes, a jaw that stayed clenched even at rest. A faint scar traced the inside of his forearm, pale against weathered skin, one of many reminders he no longer counted. He had learned that some details were better left unspoken, even to himself. The cabin was small, built from old logs darkened by time and weather, reinforced in places where storms had tested it. It sat right at the boundary between order and wilderness, where cleared land gave way abruptly to towering pines and tangled undergrowth. Silas had chosen it because there was no gentle transition. One step took you from safety into uncertainty. That line mattered to him. He liked knowing exactly where it was. Brim stood a few feet from the door, unmoving, his gaze fixed on the tree line beyond the window. The German shepherd was large, heavier than most of his kind, with a powerful chest and long legs built for endurance. His coat was black along the spine, fading into deep brown at the flanks and face, marked by a dark mask that gave him a perpetually serious expression. At nearly 8 years old, Brim was past his prime by civilian standards, but not by Silas's. Experience showed in the dog's eyes, amber, alert, and calm, in a way that came only from repetition and consequence. Brim had been trained for military service, deployed in places where mistakes were final. Retirement had not dulled him. It had simply narrowed his focus. Silas moved to the stove, poured coffee into a chipped enamel mug, and listened. Listening was something he had always done well, not just for sound, but for absence, for the things that should have been there and were not. Outside, the forest was quiet. No engines, no voices, no disturbance carried on the wind. Snow softened everything, burying sharp edges, muting movement. Silence, real silence, was rare. Silas trusted it because it did not lie. Noise could deceive. Silence never did. People in Alder Ridge knew little about him. They knew he paid in cash, spoke politely, and left quickly. They knew he did not attend town gatherings or linger for conversation. Some assumed he was unfriendly. Others thought him broken. Neither was entirely wrong, but neither was complete. Silas did not avoid people out of bitterness. He avoided them because proximity always demanded something in return: stories, explanations, reassurances. He had learned long ago that answering questions invited more of them. The forest asked nothing. The forest simply existed. His days followed a pattern that rarely changed. He rose before dawn, checked the perimeter, split wood, cleaned what needed cleaning. His boots were always placed side by side near the door, his jacket hung within arm's reach. These were not superstitions. They were systems built to reduce uncertainty. Systems had kept him alive once. He saw no reason to abandon them now. Brim followed him as he stepped outside, paws sinking soundlessly into fresh snow. The dog moved ahead, nose low, tail steady, mapping the invisible world of scent with practiced ease. Silas watched him closely, not because he doubted Brim, but because he trusted him. Trust, earned and maintained, was not passive. It required attention. The dog paused briefly near the fence, ears twitching, then continued along the tree line. Nothing unusual. That, too, was information. Silas scanned the forest beyond the clearing, his eyes adjusting automatically to shadow and contrast. Years ago, he would have catalogued distances, angles, exits without conscious thought. That instinct had never truly shut off. He no longer carried a weapon, but his body remembered how it felt to be ready. Readiness did not fade just because the world insisted you no longer needed it. Inside the cabin, the fire burned low and steady, casting warm light against rough-hewn walls. Brim returned to his position near the door, settling in a way that allowed him to rise instantly if needed. Silas sat in a worn chair by the hearth, mug cradled in his hands, and let his thoughts drift just enough to ease the day's tension. He did not dwell on the past. Dwelling was dangerous. Memories had a way of rearranging themselves when given too much space. There was one decision, one moment of hesitation that sometimes surfaced when he was tired. A voice not answered quickly enough. A warning missed. He did not replay it in full. He had learned to stop before it reached that point. Some wounds did not heal. They simply learned where to hide. Brim sensed the shift, as he always did. The dog rose and moved closer, pressing lightly against Silas's leg, a solid, grounding presence. It was not affection in the way people expected. It was alignment. Two beings sharing the same awareness of the present moment. Silas rested a hand briefly on Brim's head, feeling the warmth beneath thick fur, then let it fall away. That was enough. As evening settled, the temperature dropped sharply. The sky darkened into a heavy slate gray, and the forest absorbed what little light remained. Silas secured the windows, checked the locks again, and prepared for nightfall. Routine was not boredom. Routine was control. Control kept the past from bleeding into the present. Outside, the wind stirred the upper branches, carrying the scent of pine and snow. Somewhere deep in the forest, an owl called once, then fell silent. Brim's ears flicked, but his posture did not change. Whatever it was, it did not concern him. Silas leaned back, eyes half closed, listening to the steady crackle of the fire and the quiet rhythm of the dog's breathing. This was the life he had chosen, simple, contained, and distant from the chaos he once knew too well. He believed that by placing himself at the edge of things, he could finally leave the worst of it behind. He did not know that silence, the very thing he trusted most, was already thinning. For now, though, the cabin held. The forest remained still, and Brim kept watch, as he always did, like a soldier who had never been told the war was over. The following night, the silence around the cabin felt thinner, as if the forest itself had shifted, while Silas Hartman was not looking. Snow fell steadily, not in violent gusts, but in heavy, patient layers that softened every edge and swallowed every sound. The air was colder than the night before, sharp enough to sting the inside of his lungs with each breath. Silas stepped out onto the packed snow near the cabin, pulling his jacket tighter, already aware that something in the rhythm of the night was wrong. Brim sensed it before Silas did. The German shepherd had been walking a few steps ahead of him along the edge of the clearing, moving with the same quiet assurance he always did, when he stopped so abruptly that Silas nearly collided with his broad back. Brim froze, every muscle locked in place. His ears rose high and forward, his head tilting slightly as he drew in the air. The snow continued to fall around him, settling on his dark coat, but he did not shake it off. He was listening with his nose now, not his ears. Silas knew that posture. He had seen it in deserts and mountains, under skies very different from this one. It was not curiosity. It was not alarm. It was recognition. "Easy," Silas murmured, his voice low, barely disturbing the air. He did not reach for Brim or step past him. He had learned long ago that interrupting a working dog at moments like this only dulled the truth the animal was trying to read. Instead, he stayed still and watched. Brim lowered his head toward the snow and sniffed once, slow and deliberate. Then again. His tail stiffened, no longer swinging with relaxed balance, but held straight, controlled. A faint sound rumbled deep in his chest, restrained and almost inaudible. The wind shifted, threading through the trees, and something unfamiliar slid through it, thin and metallic beneath the clean smells of pine and frozen earth. Silas felt it then, not as a scent, but as a memory. His shoulders tightened, spine straightening as if a weight had been placed there. Blood carried differently in the cold. Snow scattered it, broke it apart, stretched it across distance and time. To most people, it vanished. To Brim, it lingered. To Silas, it awakened instincts he had spent years trying to keep dormant. He scanned the tree line beyond the fence, eyes adjusting to shadow and contrast. The forest stood dense and unmoving, trunks rising like dark pillars against the white ground. Snow clung to branches, occasionally slipping free and falling with soft, hollow thuds. Nothing moved. No shapes broke the stillness. And yet, the stillness itself felt disturbed, like water after something had passed beneath its surface. Brim took a single step forward, then stopped again, reassessing. His nose traced a short arc in the air rather than the ground now, testing the wind. The scent was faint, old enough to be diluted, recent enough to matter. Whatever carried it had not lingered. It had moved. Quickly, poorly concealed. Silas exhaled slowly, grounding himself in the present. He had chosen this place to be left alone, to exist outside the orbit of other people's mistakes and emergencies. Alder Ridge was far enough away that trouble rarely wandered this close, and when it did, it usually announced itself. Sirens, engines, voices. This was different. This was quiet trouble, the kind that slipped through unnoticed until it was too late. He stepped closer to Brim, careful with his footing, and crouched near the fence. Snow there was uneven, subtly disturbed in ways that could have been dismissed as animal tracks by anyone who did not know better. Silas brushed aside the top layer with his gloved hand. Beneath it, the snow was compressed, slightly darker. No clear footprints, no obvious trail, just enough to confirm what Brim already knew. Someone had passed through here. Brim turned his head slightly, angling his body toward the left side of the clearing where the forest dipped and the trees grew closer together. He did not move forward yet. He waited. Brim had learned, like Silas, that not every discovery required immediate pursuit. Sometimes information alone was enough. Silas stood slowly, muscles coiled, mind already working through possibilities he did not want to name. A hunter? Unlikely. Hunters did not move like this, did not bleed and keep moving without purpose. An injured animal? Possible, but the scent did not match. Blood, yes, but not fur or fear. This was human blood. Silas did not need Brim to tell him that, even if Brim already had. A memory pressed against the edge of his thoughts. Another night. Another dog pausing just like this. Back then, Silas had hesitated, weighed options, waited for confirmation. By the time confirmation arrived, it had been too late. He had carried that lesson with him ever since, heavy and unresolved. Brim took another cautious step, then looked back at Silas. The dog's amber eyes held no question, only awareness. Something was out there, not here, not yet, but close enough to matter. Silas straightened fully and looked toward the cabin, its windows glowing faintly through the snowfall. Safety was a few dozen steps away. Warmth, control, the life he had built to keep the world at a distance. He could turn back now, secure the door, and tell himself that whatever had passed through the forest would continue on its way. Snow would erase the rest by morning. The forest did not care what he chose, but Brim watched him carefully, as if weighing Silas in return. Silas stepped forward just one pace, then stopped. He did not follow the scent. Not yet. He needed to understand it first. He moved along the fence line, parallel to the trees, eyes low, reading the ground in fragments rather than patterns. Snow hid more than it revealed, but absence told its own story. Where branches were bent, where drifts were broken, where the wind carried something that did not belong. Brim mirrored his movement, maintaining distance, nose working constantly. The dog paused near a cluster of trees, then shook his head once, almost in frustration. The scent was thinning. Wind and snowfall were winning. Whatever had passed through was moving fast, or had already put distance between itself and this place. Silas rested his hands on his knees and listened, not just to the forest, but to himself. His heart rate had settled into a steady, deliberate rhythm. This was not fear. This was readiness. He had hoped never to feel it again, but the body remembered what the mind pretended to forget. "Not tonight," he said quietly, more a decision than a statement. Brim did not resist. He stepped back, returning to Silas's side, though his head turned once more toward the trees before he did. The dog had marked the scent. It would not leave him easily. They returned to the cabin without speaking, snow already softening their tracks behind them. Inside, Silas secured the door and added wood to the fire. Brim resumed his position near the entrance, lying down but not sleeping, ears still angled toward the outside world. The cabin felt smaller now, not because anything had changed within it, but because something beyond it had announced its presence. Silas sat by the fire, hands wrapped around his mug, and stared into the flames. He hadn't found anyone, he had not intervened, yet the night no longer felt empty. Somewhere beyond the tree line, a story was unfolding, one that had brushed against his carefully constructed solitude without asking permission. The scent beneath the snow lingered, faint but persistent, carried not just by the wind, but by the past Silas had never fully outrun. And as the fire crackled softly and the storm deepened outside, he knew one thing with quiet certainty. Silas did not turn back toward the cabin. The decision came quietly, without debate, settling into him with the same certainty as gravity. Brim had already shifted his weight forward, nose low, body angled toward the darker stretch of forest where the ground dipped and the snow lay uneven. The scent was thinning, but it was not gone. Not yet. Silas stepped past the fence line, boots crunching softly as he entered the trees, the cabin light fading behind him until it became nothing more than a memory of warmth. The forest closed around them almost immediately. Branches sagged under the weight of snow, brushing Silas's shoulders as he moved deeper, each step careful, deliberate. Brim advanced in short bursts, stopping often to reassess, circling back when the wind shifted, then correcting course again. This was no clean trail. It was the desperate movement of someone injured, pushing forward without direction, driven more by fear than plan. Silas read the signs as they appeared in fragments. A broken twig here, a shallow depression in the snow there, places where someone had slipped, caught themselves, then continued on without stopping to fix the mistake. Blood showed only rarely now, a faint discoloration where snow had been compacted and then dusted over again. Enough to confirm what Brim already knew, enough to keep them moving. The wind picked up, sliding between the trunks in uneven waves. Silas adjusted his pace, staying just far enough behind Brim to avoid interfering, close enough to react if something went wrong. His breathing remained steady, controlled, the way it always did when the world narrowed down to a single task. This was not curiosity driving him forward. It was responsibility. Something had crossed into his perimeter, wounded and alone, and that made it his concern whether he wanted it to be or not. Brim stopped abruptly near a cluster of young pines where the snow had been disturbed more heavily. His posture changed, subtle but unmistakable. Head lifted, ears forward. The low hum of alertness returned to his chest. Silas slowed, scanning the area before stepping closer. The ground sloped gently downward here, creating a shallow pocket where wind had piled snow higher along the edges. It was the kind of place someone might collapse without meaning to. Silas saw the shape before he fully recognized it. A man lay partially on his side near the base of the fence, where it curved into the trees, one shoulder pressed awkwardly into the snow. His jacket was dark, stiffened by ice and dried blood, torn high along the shoulder where a darker stain spread outward in uneven lines. One arm was bent beneath him at an unnatural angle, the other stretched forward, fingers curled as if he had tried to pull himself farther, and failed. Snow clung to his hair and the folds of his clothing, already beginning to claim him. Brim approached first, careful and controlled. He sniffed once, then stepped back, positioning himself slightly to the side, eyes never leaving the man. He did not bark. He did not growl. His assessment was complete. Silas moved in slowly, scanning instinctively for threats that were not there. No movement beyond the man, no sound but the wind. He knelt, placing a hand near the man's neck, feeling for a pulse. It was there, weak but steady enough. The man was alive, though only just. Up close, Silas could see more clearly. The man looked to be in his late 30s, lean with sharp features and the kind of worn expression that suggested a life lived under pressure rather than comfort. Dark hair lay matted against his forehead, stubble shadowed his jaw, and his skin had taken on the pale, waxy tone of someone losing heat too fast. His lips were tinged blue. His breathing came shallow and uneven, each inhale a visible effort. Silas checked the wound quickly, fingers firm, practiced. A gunshot high in the shoulder, not immediately fatal, but badly managed. Blood loss, shock, exposure. Time was already working against him. The man stirred faintly, a low sound escaping his throat as Silas adjusted his position. His eyes opened briefly, unfocused, panic flashing through them when he realized he was not alone. His mouth moved as if trying to speak, but no sound came out. His gaze fixed on Silas's face, searching for something he could not quite place. Silas met his eyes, steady and unflinching. "Easy," he said quietly. "You're not being left." The words seemed to reach the man through the fog. His eyes fluttered, then closed again, exhaustion overtaking fear. Brim stepped closer, standing watch, his body angled outward toward the forest while Silas focused on the task in front of him. For a brief moment, the thought crossed Silas's mind that he could still call for help. He could step back, retreat, and let someone else take responsibility. That was what a civilian would do. That was what the world expected of him now. But Silas Hartman had never been defined by what was expected. "No one left behind" was not a phrase to him. It was a rule, one he had lived by, one he had broken once, and one he would not break again. Silas slid one arm under the man's shoulders and the other beneath his legs, lifting carefully, adjusting when the man groaned softly in response. The weight was familiar, not heavy, but significant in a way that had nothing to do with muscle. Human weight, human consequence. Snow clung to Silas's boots as he turned back toward the cabin, each step deliberate, controlled. Brim moved ahead immediately, clearing the path, stopping once to glance back and ensure Silas was still behind him. The cabin light came into view through the trees, faint but steady, a small square of warmth cutting through the night. By the time Silas reached the clearing, his breath burned in his chest, but his grip never loosened. He kicked the cabin door open and maneuvered inside, lowering the man carefully onto the rug near the fire. Warmth rushed in around them, sharp and almost overwhelming after the cold. The man shuddered violently, a weak sound tearing free as his body reacted. Silas wasted no time. Jacket off, wound exposed. He worked with efficiency born of repetition, not hesitation, cleaning what he could, applying pressure where it mattered. Brim resumed his position near the door, standing watch, ears angled toward the forest as if nothing beyond that threshold had ceased to exist. Silas did not ask the man's name. He did not reach for the phone. Those things would come later, if later came at all. For now there was only the fire, the wounded stranger, and a decision already made. Whatever this man had done, whatever had driven him into the forest bleeding and alone, Silas would not let him die in the snow. That was not the choice of a civilian. It was the instinct of a SEAL who had never learned how to abandon the fallen. Morning arrived without warmth. The light that filtered through the cabin windows was pale and flat, turning the snow outside into a wide, colorless sheet that reflected sound instead of absorbing it. Silas Hartman stood near the stove, listening as the forest woke in small, careful movements. Brim had not settled since dawn. The German shepherd paced once, then stopped near the door, ears angled forward, posture rigid in a way Silas recognized instantly. This was not vigilance born of routine. This was warning. The wounded man lay on the rug by the fire, breathing shallowly. His color improved just enough to suggest that the night had not taken him. Silas had worked quietly until the first gray hint of morning, cleaning the wound, stabilizing what he could, keeping the man warm. He had not asked questions. He had not checked for identification. The forest had offered him a problem, and he had answered it. Now the world beyond the trees was answering back. The sound came faint at first, a distant mechanical hum that did not belong to wind or wildlife. Brim's head lifted higher, his gaze fixed on the clearing. Silas moved to the window and watched as the hum grew louder, resolving into engines. Not one, several. They approached slowly, cautiously, as if testing the land before committing to it. Red and blue lights flickered between the trunks, staining the snow with brief, unnatural color. Silas did not swear. He did not rush. He simply acknowledged what he was seeing and adjusted. The town of Alder Ridge lay far enough away that traffic never came this close by accident. Whatever had happened overnight had weight, enough to bring uniforms into the forest. Brim let out a low sound, deep and steady, his body angled protectively toward the door. The dog's muscles were tight beneath his coat, tail held low, every line of him drawn inward as if conserving energy. He had not been trained for police work, but he knew the signs of pursuit. He had known them long before Silas ever brought him here. Silas stepped outside, closing the door carefully behind him. Cold air cut across his face, sharp and clean. The clearing had changed overnight. Tracks crisscrossed the snow now, heavy boots and tire impressions cutting through the quiet order Silas preferred. 2 patrol vehicles stood near the edge of the clearing, angled to block the narrow approach. Beyond them, more movement flickered between the trees. A tall man in a dark winter coat stepped forward, boots crunching with deliberate authority. He was in his late 50s, broad through the shoulders, his posture upright in a way that came from years of command rather than youth. A silver badge caught the light on his chest. His hair was gray and closely cropped, his expression composed but alert. This was Sheriff Allen Brooks, though Silas did not know his name yet. Brooks had the look of a man who had seen enough trouble to respect it without dramatizing it. Behind him moved a woman several years younger, lean and sharp-eyed, her dark hair pulled back tightly beneath her cap. She scanned the tree line as she walked, attention split between the forest and the cabin. Deputy Claire Monroe carried herself with quiet confidence, her movements economical, her hand resting near her radio without touching it. People in Alder Ridge knew her as capable and distant, shaped by an early career mistake that had taught her never to underestimate calm situations. She did not smile easily. She did not miss much. Sheriff Brooks raised a hand, palm outward, not in greeting, but acknowledgement. "Morning," he said, his voice carrying easily in the cold air. "We're going to need to secure this area." Silas nodded once. "What's going on?" "A robbery in town last night," Brooks replied. "Armed, one suspect injured during the escape. Tracks led this way." Silas felt the words settle into place, aligning with what he already knew. The scent beneath the snow, the wound, the desperation in the man's movement through the forest. None of it had been random. He glanced back toward the cabin door, where Brim's shadow was visible through the glass. Deputy Monroe stepped closer, her eyes flicking briefly to Silas's boots, then to the ground near the fence. "You live alone out here," she said, not a question. "See or hear anything unusual overnight?" Silas kept his voice level. "Snow, wind, nothing else." It was not a lie, not entirely. The forest had spoken, but not in ways the law recognized. Brooks studied him for a moment longer, then nodded. "We're setting a perimeter," he said. "No one in or out until we finish a sweep." Brim barked once from inside the cabin, sharp and controlled, then went silent. The sound carried tension with it, enough to draw Monroe's attention back to the door. "You have a dog," she said. "German shepherd," Silas replied. "Retired?" Monroe's eyes lingered, assessing. "He seems alert." "He always is." Brooks shifted his weight, glancing toward the tree line where deputies were fanning out, radios murmuring softly as they coordinated. "If you remember anything," he said, "anything at all, let us know. We're dealing with someone who's hurt and potentially dangerous." Silas met his gaze evenly. "I understand." As the sheriff turned away, Brim's barking resumed, louder now, edged with urgency. Silas opened the door just enough to calm him, placing a hand against the dog's shoulder. Brim pressed into it briefly, then turned his head toward the forest again, ears rigid. Inside, the wounded man shifted, a low sound escaping his throat as awareness flickered. His eyes opened slightly, unfocused, then sharpened as the distant voices and radios reached him. Fear rose quickly, raw and immediate. He tried to move and failed, pain stopping him short. Silas knelt beside him, placing a steady hand on his chest. "Easy," he said quietly. "You're not going anywhere." The man's breathing quickened. His gaze darted toward the door, then back to Silas. He did not ask who was outside. He already knew. Brim stood between them and the door now, body tense, a physical barrier. The dog's reaction was different from the night before. This was not scent analysis. This was recognition of pressure closing in. He whined softly, a sound of restraint rather than fear. Silas looked from the man to the door, understanding settling with uncomfortable clarity. The police had not come for the forest. They had come for what had passed through it, and what lay on his cabin floor was tied directly to that pursuit. The world Silas had kept at arm's length had found him anyway. Outside, radios crackled with updates. Voices called distances, directions, confirmations. The forest that had once offered silence now reflected sound back in fragments, every word carrying weight. Silas stood slowly, his mind working through options he had hoped never to consider again. He had acted on instinct, on an old rule he had never stopped believing in. Now that instinct had placed him at the center of something larger than his solitude. Brim's tension mirrored his own, a shared understanding that the perimeter was shrinking. Silas did not reach for the phone. He did not step outside to explain. Not yet. He needed to understand the shape of what was closing in before he decided how to meet it. Through the window he watched deputies move between the trees, methodical and patient. The forest was no longer neutral ground. It had become a boundary, tightening with each passing minute. Silas rested a hand on Brim's head, feeling the dog's controlled strength beneath his palm. "Stay," he murmured. Brim did not relax, but he obeyed. As the sound of boots and radios grew closer, Silas accepted what the morning had made unavoidable. The man he had pulled from the snow was not just a wounded stranger. He was part of whatever had brought the law into the trees, and sooner or later that truth would have to be faced. The forest had closed in. Silence was no longer an option. The forest did not quiet down after the patrol cars arrived. It changed. Sound traveled differently now, bouncing between trees instead of dissolving into snow. Radios crackled in short bursts. Boots compressed fresh powder into firm lines. Silas Hartman stood just beyond the cabin door with Brim at his side, watching the perimeter tighten with measured patience. He did not interfere. He waited. That was the habit of a man who understood momentum and when to let it reveal itself. Brim did not wait. The German shepherd shifted abruptly, nose lifting, body angling away from the cabin and toward the eastern edge of the clearing, where the trees thickened and the ground sloped toward a cluster of old roots. His ears locked forward. The tension that had wound him tight since dawn sharpened into focus. This was no longer the diffuse unease of pursuit. This was a point. Silas felt it immediately. He did not give a command. He did not need to. Brim stepped off the packed path and into the snow, moving with a certainty that cut through the morning's noise. Silas followed at a careful distance, eyes tracking the dog rather than the deputies. He trusted Brim to find the truth faster than any map. Deputy Claire Monroe noticed first. She was lean and alert, with a habit of reading movement before sound, and her gaze followed the dog as he cut across the clearing. "Sheriff?" she said quietly, tilting her head toward the trees. "The dog's onto something." Sheriff Allen Brooks paused mid-instruction. He was a tall man with a steady presence, gray hair cropped close, lines at his eyes that spoke of long nights and heavier decisions. He watched Brim's path, then nodded once. "Let him work," he said, "but keep eyes on Hartman." Two deputies peeled off, keeping a respectful distance. One of them was a younger man named Evan Pike, early 30s, broad-faced and earnest, still carrying the energy of someone who believed procedures could solve most problems. He stayed close to Monroe, eyes flicking between the dog and Silas, trying to reconcile instinct with protocol. Brim reached the base of a massive pine whose roots clawed out of the ground like frozen hands. Snow had piled unevenly around it, disturbed in small, telling ways. The dog lowered his head and began to dig. Not frantic, precise. Snow flew back in controlled bursts as his paws worked, exposing darker layers beneath. Silas knelt beside him, scanning outward, not inward. Discovery had a way of drawing attention. Metal glinted briefly through the snow. Brim dug again and uncovered a canvas bag, dark green, the fabric stiff with cold and something darker that soaked through in irregular patches. Blood, fresh enough to stain, old enough to have begun to dry. The dog paused, sniffed, then nudged the bag aside with his nose. Beneath it lay a handgun, partially buried, the grip exposed, the barrel packed with snow. It was small, practical, the kind of weapon meant to disappear when dropped. A murmur rippled through the line of deputies. Monroe stepped closer, eyes narrowing. She crouched, careful not to disturb the scene. "Bag and a firearm," she said evenly. "Looks like our missing pieces." Evan Pike swallowed and glanced at Silas. "That yours?" he asked, the question automatic and poorly timed. Silas did not answer. He stood slowly, placing himself just behind Brim. The dog had shifted now, no longer digging, no longer sniffing. He had planted himself squarely between Silas and the deputies, broad chest forward, head high, body perfectly still. It was not aggression. It was refusal. Brim stood his ground. His posture spoke clearly to anyone who knew dogs. He was not preparing to attack. He was preparing to block. His eyes were fixed on the nearest movement, muscles coiled but contained. A low sound vibrated in his chest, controlled and steady, a warning shaped by discipline rather than fear. "Hold," Brooks said immediately, his voice cutting through the rising tension. He lifted a hand, palm down, and the deputies froze where they stood. Monroe remained crouched, her voice calm. "He's guarding," she said. "Not the evidence. The man." Silas felt the truth of it land with quiet clarity. Brim was not protecting the bag or the gun. Those were objects. He was protecting Silas and, by extension, the decision Silas had already made. The dog had drawn a line where none had existed before, and everyone present could feel it. Evan Pike shifted his weight nervously. "Sheriff, policy—" Brooks cut him off with a glance. "Policy doesn't get to rush this." He stepped forward alone, boots crunching softly, stopping well short of Brim's reach. He lowered his voice. "Mr. Hartman," he said, "we need to secure what your dog found." Silas met his eyes. He did not raise his hands. He did not step aside. "You will," he said evenly, "when you slow down." Brim did not move. His tail was still, his breathing measured. Monroe rose to her feet slowly. She studied Brim with professional respect, reading the angles of his stance, the set of his shoulders. "He's trained," she said to Brooks. "Not police K-9, but military. He's choosing restraint." Brooks nodded. "Then we'll match it." He signaled the deputies back with a small motion. Radios fell silent. The forest seemed to lean in, every sound sharpened by the pause. Brooks turned his attention back to Silas. "We found blood in town," he said, "a suspect wounded during an armed robbery. We follow tracks into the woods. Your dog finds a bag and a gun near your place." He let the facts sit where they belonged. "Help me understand the order of events." Silas did not look away. "My dog found a scent last night," he said. "Human. Injured. Moving fast. This morning, he followed it again." Monroe's gaze flicked to the cabin. "And the man?" Silas did not answer immediately. Brim's ears twitched at the word, but his stance did not change. Silas placed a steady hand on the dog's shoulder, not to restrain him, but to acknowledge the bond that had drawn this moment into being. "He's alive," Silas said. "Because of that." Brooks exhaled slowly. "You brought him inside." "Yes." A silence settled that felt heavier than accusation. Brooks glanced toward the bag and the gun, then back to Silas. "You understand how this looks?" Silas nodded once. "I do." Monroe stepped closer again, her voice careful. "Sheriff, the dog's behavior matters," she said. "He's not escalating. He's asking for space." Brooks considered this, then addressed Silas directly. "We're not here to take your dog," he said. "We're here to take the evidence and the suspect, but we're going to do it right." Silas's jaw set, not in defiance but resolve. "Then listen," he said, "before you move." Brim's low sound eased just slightly, as if he sensed alignment. Snow drifted down around them, settling on shoulders and hats, softening edges again. For the first time since the patrols arrived, no one spoke over anyone else. Brooks nodded. "All right," he said. "We listen." Brim did not step aside. He held his ground, a living barrier of discipline and loyalty, forcing men with badges and weapons to pause and consider the shape of the moment. In the quiet that followed, the forest reclaimed a fraction of its authority, and the line between pursuit and understanding became visible at last. The fire inside the cabin burned low and steady, its light casting long, wavering shadows across the log walls. Outside, the forest remained tense with waiting, boots and radios held at a respectful distance, but inside there was only warmth, smoke, and the sound of a wounded man breathing. Silas Hartman closed the door gently, not to shut the law out, but to give the truth a space where it could surface without being shouted down. The man lay on the rug near the hearth, wrapped in a thick blanket Silas had pulled from the spare cot. His face had regained a trace of color, though pain still carved sharp lines around his eyes and mouth. Up close, he looked older than Silas had first thought. Early 40s, maybe? Lean to the point of brittleness. His dark hair was thinning at the temples, and his hands trembled faintly when he tried to move them, not only from injury, but from exhaustion that ran deeper than the night. His name, when Silas finally asked, was Lucas Reed. Lucas spoke it quietly, as if afraid that saying it too loudly might summon consequences. He had a narrow face and wary eyes, the kind that watched for reactions before committing to words. There was nothing theatrical about him, no bravado, no practiced defiance. He looked like a man who had spent a long time saying yes because saying no had always cost him more. Brim lay near the door, head up, body relaxed, but alert. The German shepherd watched Lucas with measured calm, not as a threat, but as a variable that required attention. His presence filled the small space, grounding it, reminding everyone inside that this cabin was not neutral territory. It was guarded. Silas crouched beside Lucas, checking the bandage once more, adjusting it where blood had seeped through. "You're stable," he said. "Not fixed, but stable." Lucas swallowed hard. "You didn't have to," he said, his voice rough. "Most people would have left me." Silas did not answer right away. He added another log to the fire, watching the flames climb and settle. Firelight had a way of stripping things down. Lies did not hold their shape well in it. "Why were you running?" Silas asked finally. Lucas's eyes flicked toward the window, where faint movement and muffled voices reminded him that time was narrowing. His jaw tightened. For a moment, Silas thought he might refuse. Instead, Lucas exhaled shakily and looked back at the fire. "I wasn't supposed to be there," he said. "That's the truth. I drove. That was it." Silas remained silent. "They needed a driver," Lucas continued. "Someone who wouldn't ask questions. Someone who already owed money." His mouth twisted slightly, bitter. "I fit." He paused, breathing shallowly, then went on. "I didn't know it was going to turn violent. They said it was just a quick grab. Scare the clerk. Take the cash. In and out." His eyes lifted briefly, meeting Silas's, then dropped again. "That's how it always starts." Silas felt the weight of the words, not as justification, but as context. He had heard variations of this before, in different places, spoken by different men. Desperation wore many faces, but the voice was often the same. "What changed?" Silas asked. Lucas swallowed. "The gun went off." His hands clenched beneath the blanket. "Not by me, I swear. Someone panicked. The clerk screamed. Everything went sideways." He squeezed his eyes shut. "I ran. I wasn't supposed to run, but I did." "And they shot you?" Lucas nodded once. "In the alley. I felt it hit, but adrenaline carried me for a while. I didn't stop until I couldn't feel my arm anymore." Silas leaned back against the table, arms crossed loosely, listening not just to the story, but to the spaces between sentences. Lucas was not embellishing. He was not asking for absolution. He was explaining how a man ended up bleeding in the snow outside a stranger's cabin. "Why here?" Silas asked. Lucas laughed weakly, the sound breaking off into a cough. "I didn't know where I was. I just kept moving. Trees, snow, fences. I thought if I stopped, I'd die." He opened his eyes again, fear naked there. "I didn't think anyone lived out here." Brim shifted slightly at the sound of Lucas's raised voice, then settled again when Silas placed a hand briefly on his back. The dog accepted the gesture and returned his attention to the room. Silas straightened slowly. Outside, Sheriff Brooks and Deputy Monroe waited, patient but alert. They had given him space. Not trust. Space. The difference mattered. "You know they're here for you," Silas said. Lucas nodded. "I heard them." His gaze dropped to the floor. "I figured it was over." "It is," Silas said, not unkindly, not cruelly, just honestly. Lucas flinched at the certainty in his tone. "You could hide me," he said, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "Just for a day. Let me heal. I wouldn't run. I swear." His eyes searched Silas's face, desperate now. "You don't owe them anything." Silas closed his eyes briefly. For a moment the fire crackled louder, filling the silence with sound. This was the choice he had known was coming from the moment he lifted Lucas from the snow. It was the kind of choice that did not announce itself as good or bad, only as necessary. He thought of another man, years ago, who had begged for time. Just a few minutes, just enough to regroup. Silas had given it to him then, and the cost had been paid by someone else. No one left behind did not mean no one was ever held accountable. It meant you did not abandon the wounded to the cold. It did not mean you erased consequences. Silas opened his eyes and looked at Lucas steadily. "I'm not hiding you." Lucas's shoulders sagged, relief and fear collapsing into each other. "So that's it." "No," Silas said. "That's not it." He stepped toward the door, then stopped. "You're going to walk out of here," he said. "On your feet. Alive. That part matters." Lucas stared at him, confused. "You're turning me in." "I'm taking you out," Silas corrected. "There's a difference." Outside, Brim rose to his feet as Silas reached for the door, sensing movement, purpose. The dog positioned himself close, ready. When the door opened, cold air rushed in, carrying the sounds of the waiting deputies. Sheriff Brooks stepped forward immediately, his expression measured. Silas spoke before anyone else could. "He's inside," he said. "He's wounded. He didn't pull the trigger." Brooks studied him, then glanced past him into the cabin, where Lucas sat upright with effort, pale but conscious. Deputy Monroe's eyes softened just a fraction, not in sympathy, but recognition of the human cost beneath procedure. "We'll handle it from here," Brooks said. Silas shook his head once. "I'll bring him out." Brim stood at Silas's side as he helped Lucas to his feet, supporting him as they moved toward the door. The man leaned heavily on Silas, pain etched into every step, but he did not resist. When they emerged into the clearing, the deputies moved in carefully, weapons lowered, hands ready but restrained. Lucas looked at Silas one last time. "You didn't have to do this," he said quietly. Silas met his gaze. "Yes," he said, "I did." Sheriff Brooks gave the order without raising his voice. Two deputies moved immediately, lifting Lucas Reed carefully from the cabin steps and guiding him toward the waiting vehicle. Lucas did not look back. His shoulders sagged with exhaustion more than fear, as if the confession by the fire had already taken everything he had left to give. The door closed. The engine started. Snow swallowed the sound as the car eased away down the narrow track toward town. Brooks watched the vehicle disappear between the trees, then turned to Silas Hartman. "We'll take him in first," he said, practical and measured. "He'll get medical care and formal processing." His eyes shifted briefly to Brim, who stood beside Silas, posture tight but controlled. "The shooter didn't come this way by accident. Your dog already proved he can read this forest better than any of us." Silas did not answer immediately. He understood the weight behind the request before it was fully spoken. Cooperation meant stepping back into something he had deliberately left behind. It meant movement, pursuit, decisions made under pressure. Brim felt it too. The German shepherd's ears flicked toward the tree line, then back to Brooks, as if tracking intent rather than sound. "I'm not asking you to wear a badge," Brooks continued, "just to help us finish this before someone else gets hurt." The forest stood quiet around them, snow drifting down in slow, patient layers. Silas looked past Brooks, past the deputies adjusting gear and tightening straps, toward the dark stretch of trees where the ground dipped and vanished. Lucas's words still hung in the air, pointing not backward, but forward. Someone else was out there, someone who had fired the gun and walked away. Silas nodded once. "We'll track," he said. "Not we might, not we'll see. Just we'll track." Brooks exhaled and lifted his radio. "All units," he said calmly. "Driver is en route. We're shifting focus. Hartman and the dog are leading." Brim moved before anyone else did. The moment the decision was made, the German shepherd stepped off the packed snow and into the forest as if the ground itself had called him forward. His body sharpened into motion, nose low, tail straight, stride lengthening with purpose. This was not the chaotic scent of panic and blood from the night before. This trail was cleaner, colder, calculated. The man ahead had time now, and that made the hunt narrower, not wider. Silas followed without hesitation, boots finding rhythm behind Brim's pace. He felt the old awareness slide back into place, not with dread, but with clarity. This was not about returning to the past. This was about finishing something that had begun the moment a wounded man crossed his fence line. The deputies fell in behind them, spacing tight but disciplined. Brooks stayed close enough to read Brim's shifts, far enough not to crowd the work. Deputy Monroe moved on Silas's right, lean and focused, eyes scanning ahead rather than down. Evan Pike struggled briefly to match pace, then adjusted, urgency burning off hesitation. Radios went quiet. Hand signals replaced words. The forest changed as they moved deeper. Snow thinned along exposed ridges and packed hard in the low ground. Brim corrected constantly, cutting left, then right, lifting his head to test the air when the wind shifted, dropping it again when the scent rejoined the ground. Silas read the forest alongside him. Scuffed bark, a torn branch, a place where someone had slid and caught themselves too late. This was no longer flight. This was evasion. Brim slowed near a sharp descent and cast wide, body angling downslope. The air below pooled cold and still, sound trapped and folded inward. Silas felt it before he saw it. The land opened into a narrow ravine, its walls close and jagged, snow clinging to ledges that looked ready to give way. Brim stopped at the edge and lowered his body, muscles taut, eyes fixed downward. The signal was unmistakable. Silas dropped to one knee and scanned below. Tracks converged near the base, circling once before committing to a narrow shelf along the right wall. A man crouched there, half hidden by rock and brush, broad through the shoulders, beard rimmed with frost. His jacket was heavy, worn. His hands were bare and red with cold. A handgun rested low in his grip, not raised, not surrendered. Brooks raised a hand. Everyone froze. "End of the line," Brooks called, voice steady and unforced. "You don't have anywhere left to go." The man's eyes flicked upward, sharp and assessing. He shifted his weight once, testing distance, testing resolve. Brim stepped forward exactly one pace and stopped, planting himself at the lip of the ravine. He did not bark. He did not bare his teeth. He became a boundary. Silas stayed still, letting silence do the work. The forest answered. The man exhaled, shoulders dropping just enough to signal surrender before his hands followed. The gun slipped from his grip and vanished into the snow below with a dull, final sound. Monroe moved first, fast and precise, closing the distance along the shelf while Pike covered from above. The man did not resist as the cuffs went on. Whatever fight had driven him into the woods ended here, boxed in by stone, snow, and a dog that would not move. Brim relaxed a fraction, tension easing from his frame as the threat resolved. He turned his head once toward Silas, awaiting confirmation. Silas gave a short nod. It was finished. The deputies guided the suspect up carefully, footing slow and deliberate. No shots fired, no raised voices. The forest absorbed the moment and let it pass, already erasing tracks as snow continued to fall. Brooks stopped beside Silas at the edge of the ravine. "Couldn't have done it without you," he said simply. Silas rested a hand on Brim's neck. "He led," he replied. When they turned back toward the clearing, the forest closed behind them, reclaiming its silence. Justice had moved through it without force and without spectacle, leaving nothing but stillness in its wake. Weeks later, the cabin was still standing at the edge of the forest, but it no longer felt like a place built to disappear inside. Silas Hartman stayed. Snow came and went in quick cycles now, melting by noon, returning by nightfall. The clearing showed tracks again, not the chaotic cuts of pursuit, but clean lines of work. Boots, paws, repetition. The forest had accepted a new rhythm, and Silas moved with it instead of against it. Brim lay near the hearth most mornings, stretched out with his back to the fire and his face angled toward the door. Age had softened him slightly. His muzzle carried more gray than before, his movements slower, but nothing about him was diminished. At 8 years old, he carried the calm authority of a dog who knew his value. When he rose, others paid attention. When he stayed still, they waited. The county trucks arrived without urgency. No lights. No sirens. Sheriff Brooks kept his distance, just as promised. He sent people who needed help, not control. Silas did not make announcements. He did not advertise what he knew. He showed. Deputy Sarah Collins came first, assigned to build a small search unit for the county. She was in her mid-30s, tall and lean, with dark hair pulled tight and eyes that stayed observant even when she spoke. An early injury had slowed her once, taught her patience the hard way, and left her unwilling to rush anything that mattered. She listened more than she talked. Silas respected that immediately. She brought a dog with her. Ash was young, fast, and full of sharp energy, a Belgian Malinois with more drive than discipline. He lunged before thinking, circled before settling, tried to solve everything at once. Silas saw the same mistake he had seen in men. Speed without control always ended badly. Training stayed simple. Silas took them to the tree line and said very little. He let Brim work first. The German shepherd moved with economy, nose low, pace measured, correcting for wind without breaking stride. When the scent thinned, he paused. When it returned, he moved. No wasted effort, no noise. Ash struggled, overshot, doubled back. Frustration showed in every twitch. Sarah tightened the leash, then loosened it, learning quickly that restraint came from trust, not force. "Let him think," Silas said once. Only once. Progress came fast after that. By the third session, Ash began to slow. By the fifth, he waited before lunging. By the seventh, he stopped on his own and looked to Sarah for direction. Brim watched it all with quiet approval, correcting once with a single look that ended the behavior immediately. Authority did not need volume. By afternoon, the fire was lit again. Brim claimed his place near it, body relaxed, eyes half closed. Other dogs learned the boundary quickly. The cabin was not a playground. It was a working space. Brim enforced that without moving more than necessary. Silas found himself speaking more than he expected. Not about the war, not about the past. He talked about terrain, about wind shifts, about knowing when a trail was still alive and when it was already gone. Sarah absorbed it all, asked questions that mattered, applied corrections without ego. Sheriff Brooks stopped by occasionally, hands in his coat pockets, watching from a distance. He did not interfere. He did not rush outcomes. He understood that what was being built here would last longer if left alone. Evenings returned to silence. Silas sat by the fire with a book he rarely finished, listening to the cabin settle. The memories still came, but they no longer demanded his attention. They passed through like weather. He let them. Brim slept deeply now, paws twitching only occasionally, breath slow and steady. Contentment suited him. Pride did too. One night, as snow fell again in light, impatient sheets, Silas added another log to the fire and watched the flames climb. He realized he was no longer waiting for something to end. No chase, no danger, no past to outrun. The forest had not become gentle. It had become honest. That was enough. Brim lifted his head once, eyes opening just long enough to confirm the world was as it should be, then settled back down, tail thumping softly against the floor. Silas leaned back, warmth spreading through him, and for the first time in years he did not feel like a man standing at the edge of things. The fire still burned, and this time, so did he. In our daily lives, we face moments just like this, moments when no one is watching, moments when helping costs us comfort, moments when we must decide whether to protect ourselves or stand for truth. This story reminds us that doing the right thing does not erase the past, but it can redeem it. It can turn pain into purpose and silence into peace. If this story touched your heart, take a moment today to be that quiet miracle for someone else. Offer help, offer patience, offer courage. If you believe that God still works through ordinary people in extraordinary ways, share this story so it can reach someone who needs it. Leave a comment with Amen if you believe in choosing what is right even when it is hard. And if you want more stories that remind us of faith, redemption, and hope, subscribe to the channel and walk this journey with us. May God bless you, protect you, and guide your steps. May He bring peace to your home and strength to your heart. And may we all have the courage to stand firm when the fire still burns. Amen.